And I'm ready to begin. Over to you, Carla.
Okay, Russ, thanks so much. Hello and welcome to the Federal Government Distance Learning Association's webinar series. I'm Carla Lane. I'm FGDLA's Vice President for the Higher Education sector, and I'm the moderator for today's webinar. FGDLA is a nonprofit professional association formed to promote the development and the application of distance learning in the federal government. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and instructional media in support of the education and training needs of the federal government. FGDLA is a chapter of the United States Distance Learning Association. Our membership is derived primarily from individuals employed in the agencies within the federal government. We invite you to join with us in the exciting field. Our web address is fgdla.us. For upcoming events, put June 22nd on your calendar. That will be the FGDLA membership meeting. The next day, June 23rd, the webinar features Diamond Systems with a topic focused on instructional design for training. The next webinar is on July 21st with Kelly Barnett, who developed SHOTS microlearning for the IRS. And what started as just a few webinars has now grown. These are the topics scheduled for the next 6 months. Dates are coming soon. Dr. Say Schatz of ADL, Randy Maestre of Zoom, Diamond focused on XAPI, Helen Chamberlain applying GSA 508, the US Space Command, and Dr. Vincent Opondo of the Social Security Administration Network. And we've been talking today, Jonathan has agreed to do another webinar a little bit later on. We'll be focusing on motivational theories and gamification. So we're so proud that Zoom is a sponsor of FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us present the webinars. We'd like to thank Zoom and Russ Colbert for sponsoring today's seminar. Zoom and Russ, you're the best sponsors and partners that FGDLA could have to advance distance learning, and we want to thank you every time because this, we know, is a work of art for you. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Carla. It's a pleasure to be associated with you, Jonathan, and the Federal Government Distance Learning Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's topic is the 4 levels of gamification integration. Our expert is Dr. Jonathan Peters. He studies the science and art of motivation, which led to his title, Chief Motivation Officer for Sententia Gamification. He applies his knowledge and experience to make learning more enticing and engaging and encouraging through gamification. Dr. Peters is the co-author of Deliberate Fun, the purposeful application of game mechanics to learning experience. His depth of knowledge in this area is outstanding. Jonathan, we're so pleased to have you today. Welcome, and thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks. Always enjoy meeting, being able to speak with professionals in the learning development community. And then, so thank you for the opportunity to be here as well. So it's always fun to stand up and put things to good use here today. So what we're going to cover is the 4 levels of gamification here, the application, if you will, of gamification. So they're on the screen now. We'll go through them individually as we go through, so you don't have to memorize them all right now. So we'll cycle through here in just a few minutes. But as we get started, I want us to think about the games that we played as children. So to build a framework for this and also think about why they were, why we enjoyed them. So we're actually going to do this in the Q&A section so that I can see, just share with us what games did you play as children? So these were the ones that were around when I was a kid, so you can guess my age. So, but what about you? So just if you put it in the questions and answers, what were some games that you played as children? Because everybody can see Q&A, correct?
Yes, correct.
So that'll allow us all to be able to see it. So Kim starts right out there with a good role-playing game. So thanks. There was a time when you wouldn't admit that, playing Dungeons and Dragons. Actually doing some interesting research now on looking at the mechanics inside of RPGs and thinking about how we could use those inside of learning and development. Jeff, Monopoly, there you go, Battleship, right? Who else? What else other games did you play as a child? Okay, and so while you're doing that, you're contemplating putting it in. Here's something I want to, when we're looking at gamification. So I want this to be the type of webinar that you're engaged in it and that you're paying attention. So it's not looking over reading your mail and not clicking. So you will want to put in a game here because I want to put in a certain level of gamification here. So when you put yours in there, put your game in there, so you want to start doing this, you're going to get the player badge. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to take a screenshot of this. You're going to, you could draw a picture of it. You want to keep track of your badges as we go through this. Okay, thanks Patrice for the game of life. I have a story for that. I don't know if I'm telling it today, but about the game of life as a kid. All right, so back to the badges. So that's one layer. I'm going to add in another layer here because for some of you, you're like, so what? I'm not really into badges. So we're going to add a win state. Okay, so another game mechanic, we're going to add a win state. When you put, as you collect these badges, so you'll want to keep putting your games that you played as children in there. You stay with me to the very end. Everyone has a chance to win a free gamification certification. So this is about a $300 value. So pretty cool. You got a win state and a chance state. So we've also put in the mechanic of chance. And we're going to add one more layer. One more layer. You could lose this option. Okay, so we're going to add a lose state as well. You could lose this option if you do not earn at least 3 badges during our time together. All right, so I'm going to put it back up there because you didn't know I was going to do this to you. You did not know there'd be a great offer, and you did not know that there's a possibility of being a loser. So you still can put in your games in the, or still can take a screenshot of this. So we have Game of Life, Candyland. Yeah, I remember that one. Good. All right. So we got these badges going here. So let's get started. Gamification, I'm going to use this definition. I'm going to ask in a little bit your familiarity with gamification, but just to add a frame for it, for this, our discussion here today. Gamification is motivation design. And I always like to pause right there because you might have this, maybe the folks higher in the higher ups or something, and they won't like the name gamification. And so if you say, we want to gamify this, there might be some resistance because they say, no, we're serious people doing serious work around here. We don't pay them to have fun. If you change the name, to motivation design, it might slide through. Okay, so gamification, motivation design, it is the use of game mechanics game mechanics and dynamics in a non-game context. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a game. In fact, there's purists in the gamification community that say if it feels like a game, if it looks like a game, it's not gamified, it's a game. So we here at Sententia have a broader definition of it. It can certainly feel game-like for our purposes. All right. So first poll question I want here, because I'd like to know a little bit about you, who I'm talking to. So first poll question is, what is your level of knowledge and experience with gamification? And so you can see them here. So Guru, if you should be giving this, this webinar, gamified a program. I want this to be, this is not just adding Jeopardy or a game or, a game to a learning program, but to actually gamify it. 3 would be like a theoretical knowledge. 2, you learned about it and it's fine. Heard the term. Okay, so that's fine as well. And let me see if I am seeing the polls. I might have to have you publish them for me, Russ.
Jonathan, just select, click on polls and then launch the poll and everyone will see the questions.
I'm not seeing launch poll. Not seeing it.
Okay, let me do it then. Okay.
There, now I can see it. All right, so there you go. There we have the polls up there. And let's see how we're doing. So I don't want to take too much time. So wherever you feel like. So the first poll at the top there is check the one that most applies to you. And let's go ahead and close it and see what we have. All right, so let me pull it over here. So gamified a program. So we got a few of you theoretical knowledge looks like where most people are at, and heard the term. So thanks for admitting it and for being here today. So that's where we're sitting. There is in those spaces. So we have a theoretical knowledge, and so now for most of us, it's getting to the point of actually applying it. For those of you just joining us, who this is a new concept, you're in a good place. Okay, so this isn't going to be too overwhelming, but hopefully you'll get some good ideas. Okay, so now for participating in the poll, you took some action. So guess what? I want to reward you for those actions. So you get a second badge. The second badge is the Explorer badge. So you can take a screenshot, draw a picture, keep track of them. And then this is my email address. And so that's what you'll do is you'll email me after this session's over, and then we'll go into the drawing. And by that, I mean my assistant will decide which of you get to win the free training. So this is my big head at Sententia Games. That's my email address. Feel free to email me. All right. So moving along, that's 2 badges. A little bit about me and how I got to gamification is I'm an old professor, and so most of you are probably too young to know this yet, but the older you get, the younger students get. And so all the way back in 2008, I said, I want to start hanging out with adults. And so I signed up with one of those companies that where I would be delivering their seminars throughout the United States. And I can still remember my first seminar for this company. It was in front of 72 people in Bakersfield, California, and it was business grammar. Now, there are 3 things wrong with that statement. So we're going to open up the next poll. All right. Open up the next poll. You can see where this is going.
And you can do it, Jonathan, so you can see it. I just made you the co-host.
Oh, co-host. Okay. So let's see. Dun, 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 polling. There we go. I got it now. Okay. So now what we're going to do. No, where is it? Is it open? Oh, there it is on the wrong side. So scroll down and let's grab the second one. So with Bakersfield, California, from here, been there, and so on, and driven past. So I'm going to go through those 3 things that were wrong again. So 72 people. I was writing instructor, and so usually my class sizes were around 20 people because of the extra grading. And so 72 people, not used to this size. I show up at the venue an hour beforehand, and it's set for 55. So we have to quickly rip out all the tables. Now we're setting all the chairs down theater style. And you know how difficult that is. You're sitting there with your workbook. You got to be writing on your lap the whole time. We're doing sound check. My first time using my lav mic, and so we're doing sound check as people are arriving. We start 10 minutes late. Right? So that was the first thing. The second thing wrong is I wanted to make sure I didn't offend anybody. So I was making sure you weren't there, but it says I haven't been. Okay, so I haven't been there was for some of you who have not been to Bakersfield, California. And I think those of us who have been and driven by, we might agree that there are plenty of beautiful places in California to visit. Bakersfield is not one of them. Right? And then, so Bakersfield, California. And then the third one was business grammar. And I should have, I just realized, let's switch over because I didn't want to ask you this question. So over in the Q&A, let's put because I forgot about this poll. Put a 1 if you enjoyed English when you were in school, put a 0 if not so much. Okay, a 1 if you enjoyed it, a 0 if not so much. I'm trying to get rid of the poll. All right, so we can see how we did. So Kim's with me, Jeff's with me, because I was an English major, so some of us actually liked it. Seeing we have any zeros. So, okay, so everybody kind of liked English. But imagine the learner their boss is sending them to an all-day seminar on business grammar. Perhaps there's some resistance. Perhaps there's something they don't like. So about 30 minutes in, I looked up and I saw 72 versions of this. All right. And I said, something needs to change. Something needs to change. So I went out, I hired a coach. At the time, she was known as the activities queen, Monica Cornetti, the founder of our company. Eventually, because it's 2008, gamification wasn't a term yet. I joined the company in 2016. So our goal is, first of all, to entice learners so they they want to come to our training. They say, that looks interesting, I would like to know more. And then once they're there, to engage them in the process of learning. And then the encourage side is to take the learning with them back to the workplace. So there's something measurable change that they've gone through. So that's what brought me here. And for if you're being active and you followed me, so first of all, we had the poll and I asked you questions for the Q&A. If you would go ahead, and this is your Bakersfield badge. So you can take a picture of it. You can draw a picture of it, keep track of it, but let me know at bighead@sententiagames.com to get you through the win states, the chance states, and the lose states. Okay, so now let's launch in to those 4 levels and to really have to look at the different examinations of it. So the first one is the cosmetic. And I want us to think about where this is. And this is where a lot of gamification has happened. And by the way, where a lot of the negative ideas around gamification have happened. So the cosmetic, it goes like this. I'm giving you this webinar. I already have the 4 levels. I have the examples I'm going to show you and everything. And then I just want to put something on top of it. And so I just have this little badging system that goes on top. It's just cosmetic. It's not changing the learning in any way. And while it might be fun for you in the short term, imagine how long you would engage with this badging system. When would it cease to be interesting? When would it cease to be engaging? When would it cease to motivate you to participate in this webinar? At what point would that happen? So I did this, I'm sorry, I jumped straight into cosmetic. I didn't introduce all of these. Sorry about that. So I'm talking about the cosmetic, then we'll go on to the accessory, then we'll go on to the integrated, and then the reason for being, raison d'être, I don't know, bad. I should have got my French pronunciation before we started. So here's the thing though, about cosmetic. It's better than nothing. So at the very minimum, it got you active, got you motivated, involved in the webinar very, very early on, but cannot maintain it over time. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about you as the learner, as the participant. And like I said, the good old points, badges, and leaderboards, people use them so often because it was easy for LMSs to have these different systems. And then that's all the further people have gone with gamification. So it's very surface, but it has tremendous limitations. So we are actually I want you to think about how you felt going through this badging system, going through the badges. How did it motivate? How long would it motivate you? And because I pulled back the curtain, that's all we're going to do for badges. All right. So for the rest of the time. So go ahead and take a screenshot here. So you have my email address and you can say, hey, I went through the experience with you. So everybody that emails me, whether you got all the badges, if you grab this screenshots and email me, we'll put you in the pot. All right. So you can have some fun as well. So like I said, it has its limitations. It's better than nothing. The next layer, though, is the accessory layer. And so the accessory layer is when we start to use mechanics for a purpose. Okay, so that it's not just something up here that hopefully makes it more fun and interesting, but we actually have a reason for it. And I'm going to show you a couple examples for the accessory one. The first one was a bank that brought us in to do some consulting with them and to help them make their program bearable. So it's the usual, anybody that's been in L&D, you've had this where somebody up in the upper echelon comes running down and says, everybody needs this training because somebody messed up and didn't know what they were doing. And I want you guys to, and then you're having to run around there and having to create something in a hurry when it was really just that one person that didn't have the information that the higher up wanted. So that's what happened here. One of the VPs, this bank is in California, several branches, Miami, New York, and I believe Chicago. So it's only in the major cities. And in San Francisco, they're in 2 separate towers. And so the VP had gone over and talked to some salespeople who did not know about one of their products, one of their financial products. And so just said, that's it. We're flying everybody in, all the salespeople in, and then they're going to learn, we're going to go product to product to product to product for 4 days. And then on Friday, they'll take a test on it and and whether they pass the test or not has to do with whether they get bonuses and affects their commissions. So you can imagine what it'd be like. You're a salesperson now. Well, first of all, you fly into LA into San Francisco from somewhere else. So that would be pretty fun. And so if you're like me, that after the training's over, there's all this temptation, food and drink around San Francisco and so on, and then have to take a test at the very end. So again, like I said, they brought us in. And we came up with this concept. So there wasn't much we could do, but as they talked about the different products, they went through a map of San Francisco. So the different items, like the different bridges would be different products, the piers would be different products, and so on. And what the reason for this is still a guy standing in the front of the room, and he's a great instructor-led person. He's entertaining as far as that goes. But they still needed to go through each product. But now it's helping them pass the test because now they have a visual representation and they can go around. Cicero was famous for using this method for memorizing long speeches. In his mind, he would go around through different parts of his house. And so it was the same idea here, so that when they sat down to take the test, they could visualize where they got that information with the map here. So it's an accessory. Well, all the mechanics really were just a map, right? And taking the learners on a journey. They went on a journey. So that's the game mechanic, the basic game mechanics that we were using. So again, relatively light because it didn't change the training very much. And it was a tool to help them learn and to remember. And similarly, this one, I'm going to show you a video here in a little bit. So before I do this, but you'll see the example here of what John Meehan did. So I'm going to change to enhance the video clip and enhance, share my sound.
That's great, Jonathan. You are an expert at using Zoom controls.
I've done this before.
Not on to job training.
Sure, sound good. Okay, here we go. Yeah, right. Not my first time. Okay, here we go.
So we're having a Pokemon Pick'em. Teachers, yes, watch your heads. They're solving math problems in each of these Pokeballs. They're coming back, grabbing a new ball every time they solve a problem. How many can they solve? Look at all these people racing. 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes. Nice work. Get them sealed. Lock them up. Watch your heads, be careful. Yes. Great review activity, crazy energy. I love seeing people get fired up about learning. You can use this for any course or content area. I'm gonna get back to the game. More later.
So this is John Meehan, and you can imagine, so these are actually teachers, so that he's training, so elementary, I believe, and secondary teachers. And if you can imagine the interaction that this is encouraging, and all this is an assessment at the end of the training. So it's just, he had to do this training, again, a state-sponsored training, and at the end, this is how he ran the assessment. So imagine having that many people excited at the end of one of your learning courses to answer the questions at the end, to go through the assessment at the end of the training. So a difference is they were in groups, it wasn't individual. But again, it's an accessory. The training was similar. And again, John Meehan's very dynamic speaker, and and fun to engage with. And instead of an assessment, now we have this gamification on top of it. So that's the accessory aspect of it. So again, cosmetic is we just threw something at it. Accessories, we've given it some thought, and usually in the assessment side of things. Okay, so let's eliminate, I don't know if we can eliminate, but reduce quizzes and tests and so on. So the third one is integrated. And so integrated is where we get involved. Okay, so I'm not putting down cosmetic and accessory, but it's when the integrated is when it becomes part of the actual program. And so again, just to introduce our company a little more here. So we're Sententia Gamification. And so we have 3 levels of certification in gamification of learning. We're focused on adult learning specifically. So, so whether at the workplace or in higher education. And so we have these 3 levels. We have a system, and in the first level, there's this map that we go through. And basically, we guarantee that you'll have a successfully gamified program if you follow all of these 30 stepping stones. So there's 5 levels and 30 stepping stones that come up to here. Now, the reason I have this screen up here is because where most gamification efforts fail is because they jump right into this square right here. And they just take some game mechanics and throw it at a program, and they haven't stopped. They've missed down here is who's playing the game. And then this is what we'll talk about on my next webinar for you folks, once we get that scheduled, is to look at, first of all, who they are, and then what game mechanics will they find interesting. So instead of jumping into here and wondering why they don't engage with us, we need to make sure who are they, set our objectives, create our narrative, look at the method that we're laying it out before we get to the mechanics. And then there's some more here. And then of course up here is play testing, iterating, and prototyping, iterating, and play testing. And of course asking, is it fun? So this is, again, this is the Sententia process. We began at the first level certification and carry it all the way through. Of course, it gets more complicated as we progress, as the learning progresses. But I wanted to show you some examples, not that we created, but a couple that from our students here in the integrated section. For some reason, my computer's not wanting to advance, sorry. Okay, there we are. So, because I thought a lot of times we have to do compliance training. And so that's why I picked this example to share with you. Again, not necessarily, it's a different industry than you're in. And I can imagine that you're creating some compliance training, at least sometime we have to go through this. So I'll share with you this. So this is Brandon created this. Brandon worked at the time, he's now at a different company, but worked with Vistana. Now Vistana is a timeshare company. Okay, so I'm going to do another one of these in the Q&A. Okay, another 1 and a 0. Okay, so if you purchased a timeshare, put a 2 in the Q&A. If you went through the pitch but didn't buy, put a 1. And if you haven't been through the pitch, put a 0. Okay, if you haven't fallen for that, stay somewhere for really cheaply but you have to listen to a pitch. Okay, so in the chat bar, scroll down. Let's see if I can figure out where we started here. Sorry. Okay. So yes, we got a 1, a 0, 1, 0. So no 2s yet. Okay. So for those of you who haven't gone through yet, like I said, it sounds like a good deal. And then what happens is, I'd say it sounds like a good deal. You go there, you stay at a wonderful place, and then you have to hear the pitch to be able to get this reduced price. Just realize this, they're professionals. Right? They study this.
To get dinner, Jonathan, to get dinner. If you're hungry and if you want to have dinner, you better listen to the sales presentation.
Yeah. It goes on forever. Yeah, they just keep working you down, you get more and more hungry. Yeah, the one I went through was a breakfast. Yeah, and so they didn't release us to breakfast till after we were done. And what they didn't know is I don't typically eat breakfast, so I was fine. So anyway, so what's in there, what's in the fine print, they tell you about it. I'm not saying they're dishonest, but you don't recognize it because by the time you get into the hard sell, it's in the past because they keep making it down till they wear you down until it's like, yeah, you got enough on your credit card, just go ahead and run the credit card. But what's not clear, which you often forget, is that once a year, there's it's a maintenance fee of some kind. A lot of times that fee is more than what you paid for the unit. So you can imagine a lot of people, angry customers, call in right around the first, in this case, in the first of the year is when this became due. So in the company, everybody who has a desk, okay, so you, even though you didn't sign up for customer service, everybody who has a desk has to field angry phone calls. And so of course you don't want to do this. So, but by that I mean not maintenance, not janitorial, and so on, but everybody in a white collar position. So what happens is, of course, because you're talking about finances over the phone, everybody has to go through SEC training in around Thanksgiving time in November. And so the SEC, it has to be 100%. Of course, nobody wants to do it. Everybody's too busy and so on. So Brandon built this training program, and it was Terry the Turkey. So again, the American holiday, Thanksgiving. So Terry the turkey has lost all his tail feathers, and they're spread out throughout Thanksgiving woods. And then you, as the learner, what you do is you go out and you pick up pick up a feather, and then if read the question. If you think you can answer, you go ahead and answer it, or go through the attached training. And so this is how it works. So I explained it there. So the passing score is 22 of the 25 questions. If you get 22 out of 25, you pass. If you don't, Terry explodes. All right. So 100% compliance, everybody took it. Most people took it twice. Okay, once, of course, to pass, but but also they would take it, purposely fail so they could watch Terry explode. So imagine creating a training program that is so engaging that people want to fail and then take it again. So like I said, very, very successful program. So let me share you with one more that I thought might be similar as well with programs you might do. So this what's it called? Vitalant. What they pretty much, they're the major entity in drawing blood and the distribution of blood throughout the United States. And so highly regulated, and it changes all the time. So their EDMS is their document management system. Okay, so their document management system, the people need to be able to use it effectively, because if you're sitting there drawing someone's blood and there's a specific situation, you're not going to remember all the situations, but you might, you need to know how to get the information because it might have changed since the last time you used it. And so how to get some compliance here. So he created Kyle Miller created an escape room that people would go through. And what's fun, or I don't know if it's fun, it's a pretty nerdy thing to say. One of the things that gamification allows us to do is to provide interesting data, okay, so that we can look at. So I almost said it's fun because of the data it produces, but maybe data is not very fun for you. But so here's the story. It's Friday afternoon and everyone has left the office for the weekend. Unfortunately, due to a new security system, you're trapped and will not be able to leave unless you can find clues and navigate your way through the EDMS to find the override. Okay, so that's the narrative, sets up the narrative, and then you're launched. So here's the data that they're looking at how many times people were engaging with it, because very quickly found that they wouldn't go straight through the training. And so the average, people would come back to it almost five times. But what was interesting when Kyle built this is he could start to look, as there was this odd little data sets popping up here, these joining in times. This was all from one man. And so here was somebody that wasn't engaging in the program. In other words, he couldn't get through the room through the escape room. And so it allowed Kyle to sit down and to be able to ask him what was going on, what were the resistance points, why wasn't this working for him? Versus if you just failed a test, then he would have just failed, and you have to keep taking the test over and over again until he passed, or whatever the repercussions were. This way, without failing, well, I mean, he's failing, he's not getting out of the escape room, but able to then sit down and say what was causing the issues, what was causing the problems, and so on. So I've been talking for quite a bit now, and we've got plenty of time here, but I did want to pause and see what your questions are at this stage about anything in gamification, for instance, what you're seeing here, because I do want it to be on the practical side. That's why I chose these two examples here. So in the Q&A, feel free to pop up some questions. I don't think I missed any up to this point. Is that correct?
That's correct,
No.
Jonathan.
Okay, good. So when you think about your programs and then your integration, okay, so first of all, to just go back, oh, I guess go to this slide, just for reference points. Doing the cosmetic is easy, and there's a lot of times that you're able to do that with inside your LMS. You got the tools available to you. When it starts getting down to accessory and integration, integrated, that's where we need to really put some more time and be a little more strategic in what we're doing, why we're doing it. And then ultimately to realize that gamification is more than just than points, badges, and leaderboards. And pause and for you to type in questions before I move on to the final one.
I just wondered, Jonathan, what
Yeah.
are some reasons that gamification doesn't work, and what are some reasons that management doesn't like it?
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work is, in my, I mean, I think I'd say this generally across the board. When it's not working, it's because the learner does not enjoy these mechanics, whatever those are. So it's not motivating for them. And so that's where, let's say, so one of our core desires is saving. So collecting is a core desire for us. Well, we don't all have it at the same level. So some people are pack rats, and their garages are full and everything. And then other people just want to get rid of stuff. And so for instance, to use the badging system, why some of you might not have been motivated by it because perhaps you have a low desire for collecting things. There's not joy. You're not getting a nice little dopamine boosts by collecting 3 badges. Right? So therefore, we're not engaging in it. So that's where most of the time, that's where the breakdown happens, is because of being set up that way. So, and similarly, I guess we could say that then if it's too complex, and then they check out, if it becomes too big of a project, takes too much time. And that was the case of this last example, is for this guy that was missing it up here, he just could not, I shouldn't say could not, but didn't have the push to really engage in an escape room environment. And so that's where it failed for him. Extremely successful for everybody else. And then that's where we have to weigh the one versus the many. So, because I would say this is, you can't design for everybody. You're looking for that middle 60% of your folks, because we always have our outliers, because we're humans. Humans, whenever we test humans, we're always in this bell curve of things. And so it's really difficult. So in this case, with Kyle's company has the ability to say, well, what should we do for this person? And so he was able to just go through the old course. That's where he just wanted to sit there and just go through slide after slide after slide and process through. So, all right, well, I'll show you the last. Oh, here we go. Good, some questions. Sorry, I didn't scroll down.
There's one question from Kim. Jonathan.
Okay. Please discuss the stereotypes. Oh, okay, good. So Kim's asking about stereotypes of, like, say, millennials or gamers. So we should gamify, lean into and challenge it. So yes, and that's where gamification has become important, because we talk about the G generation. So it really starts back. So back with Gen X's and so on, because that's when we started the video game, the arcades, back in the arcade days, and then moving forward. And it does change expectations of how we are, I'll say, entertained, but also how we engage with the world. And so that's where seeing changes. The expectation is that we're going to have fun, we're going to interact. And so I would even take another layer below that, is if you look at the classrooms from like say 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and you look at classrooms now, students now are learning inside these very active environments. And so a lot of the learning in those environments with wraps around play. It used to be you'd sit at a desk and then you had recess. And now there's interaction and playing throughout the day in the classroom. So even moving forward, we're going to see even more of an expectation of learning through games. And because it's what we do naturally as children, we learned through play. So it's not just the millennials, but there is that assumption, especially as that workforce has matured, is now into middle management positions and so on, that they bring that as the norm is coming into it. Okay, other than funding restraints, deciding. Oh, so talking about technology, Jeff's asking about technology. Let me keep the time because I'll yammer on too long. Okay, so it's asking about the technology, certain approaches deciding what types of technology to apply. And this is in gamification, well, specifically even for our organization, we're looking at that, when's that crossover to the AR, VR, and XR, and all these different alternate realities and so on. And at this point, moving into the high tech, the XR experiences are distracting, except for simulations, but are actually seem to be very distracting. So our last time we were live for our level 3 certification, for instance, we experimented with doing it as an alternate AR. Let's see, yeah, alternate reality. So we played around with it because it was over a 3-day period. And so we played around with it and we actually shut it down because learning wasn't happening. People were getting too caught up in the technology that learning wasn't happening. So at this stage, this stage is probably best to stick with inside of the traditional learning environment. So you mentioned PowerPoint, video, and board games. So these are all physical things. Of course, now moving into, with inside of your different authoring tools and laying those down on your LMSs. So then that's where most of what we're seeing is being created inside of e-learning, is to create these environments like, let me go back over here, like this, Terry the Turkey was laid inside and created, and then the SCORM package sat down on top of the LMS. So that's where we're doing, most of what we're doing is inside of that environment. But we have folks creating board games. It's just with the pandemic. And actually we just, we have a game garage every Friday night. Get in touch with me, email me. It's free for people to come and visit. And so it's 2 weeks ago, it was how to create for free. You can create this board game. There's an ed tech out there that you can create these really fun board games, but they're visual. They're on screen that people can play together. So yeah, reach out to me if you'd like to see that, and I can give you. I did a podcast with the person who shared it with us, and so that'll be out in a couple of weeks as well. All right. So keep those questions coming in. And because you can see, I like to talk about stuff, but I'm going to go on to the final one here. So the reason for being in this, so inside of the integrated, we know we're still in a training program. And then, so the reason for being once is what's called a magic circle. And this was a guy Huizinga, Johann Huizinga. So don't go out and read it. Don't get it on Amazon. It's a really dry book. But he talks inside of there about the magic circle. And what happens when we cross into the magic circle, the rules change. We accept it. We accept this new reality. So if you think back to going through the wardrobe, for instance, and and so on. And so, or right outside my window here is a golf course. So if you just think of the game of golf, for some reason we cross into the magic circle, and then we make it extremely difficult to get this ball into a hole over there. So it has to shoot over water and all sorts of things. So, but the point is that it becomes an immersive experience. So I'm going to change back over to, because I'm going to show a video here. And so with this one, I'm going to show you this was created at Brown University. So Professor Egan, and so Brown has a very specific approach to education, is that they don't embrace e-learning, haven't until this last pandemic. And so what happened, because their system is very professor-student related, and so Jim Egan flew down and brought down one of the instructional designers at Brown, and they went through our level 1. They've gone all the way through to be master craftsmen. So this is their level 2 project. And so that Jim said this when he came down. So we asked him, flew all the way down to Florida, like, why are you interested in gamification? At that time, we hadn't been doing a lot of work with higher ed. And so he said, well, I'm a tenured professor. They can't fire me, which most tenured professors say. But he went on to say this. He said, we've been teaching the same way. He said but it's really, I've been teaching the same way for 30 years. My students deserve better. And so that's what caused him to create this program. You're going to see the trailer in just a second. And then since then, a new program for literary criticism, much more in depth. But here, I'll show you the trailer.
Since long before recorded history, when humans first began to tell stories, we've asked ourselves a disarmingly simple, yet seemingly unanswerable question. What does it mean to be human? Meet Layla Kalami, an avid student of humanity who just happens to be from the distant planet Io and has traveled across the galaxy to find the answer to that very question. Join Layla and me, Professor Jim Egan, in Fantastic Places, Unhuman Humans, where we will attempt to answer the unanswerable by visiting exotic locales and encountering hybrid beings reachable only through the magic of fiction. With your weathered backpack in tow and me as your expert guide, we'll travel through 3 worlds and 6 realms, visiting universes called forth by such authors as Margaret Atwood, Edgar Allan Poe, and H.P. Lovecraft. You, Layla, and your fellow travelers from across the galaxy will enter the imaginative spaces of these works through a series of quests in which you use and develop your creative powers, critical thinking skills, and analytical abilities to convey to Layla the complexities, contradictions, and uncertainties that are at the heart of being human. We may never answer the question of what it means to be human, if there even is a distinctive thing that can be called human. But after fulfilling your final quest, you'll have a better understanding of the conceptual and ethical problems that arise out of any effort to represent our humanity. Layla came all this way. We should at least show her around, right? Register now for Fantastic Places, Unhuman Humans. Adventure awaits.
Makes you want to take a literature class, huh? So, good. So again, immersive experience that they come in. So his second course that they created, he took on a persona, a character inside of it. And so when they would do group discussions, so he was this persona that disliked. So they would meet with him in taverns, but they would only drink weird juices and so on. So again, that was the lecture.
The juices were called beer.
No, well, because they might not have been of age, the students. But yeah, he answered them as in character inside of the chat rooms. But yeah, this one program, and of course, like I said, they have 2 now, really changed the way that Brown thinks now about e-learning. And of course, this is the gold standard now. This is the standard that was set as one of the first courses that was offered that way. And then their second one they were halfway through the semester during shutdown. And so of course that made it easy to transition when everybody else at Brown was struggling to get online as quickly as possible.
Hey, Jonathan.
Question, yeah, go ahead.
You know, when I first got out of the Navy, I was the video teletraining officer in the Navy. And I used to present to schools around the country and around the world. And I used the technology to present to them. And one of them was a school up in New England. And I was doing the presentation from Philadelphia via video conferencing. And I explained to them and showed them all the great benefits of distance learning. That's what we called it at the time. People today call it many different terms. But they answered when I finished the presentation, they were very courteous to wait to the very end and said, we are an Ivy League college and we're going to have our students come to us. You know, none of this distance learning stuff, have them come to us. So I'll never forget that. Boy, so many things have changed since those early days of using educational technology. It's just a situation that I'll never forget.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just that attitude of, yeah. And then that's that lecture, you know, professor-student lecture and passive learning that's been perpetuated for so long. And that's a whole other topic I have up my sleeve too.
Sure.
Now that we get here. So,
maybe a third session.
Yeah, a third one. And it's really
There's a
for
question in the Q&A that you take a look at about data.
Yeah. So interesting one in so I'd say in my book you can read and so on. So my theory of fun, I call it the new theory of fun, is that what makes something fun is that it appeals, that the game mechanic appeals to at least one of our core desires. And so that there's some sort of award system set up in our brains that cause that to be fun. Now, so that's what sets up that fun is different for different people. And so besides that, because that mine's rather complicated, Amy Jo Kim has one. Amy, so it's Amy and then J-O and then Kim. So you have to go find it. So her fun, she's a game designer. And so she has 4 types of fun. So there's serious fun and hard fun, easy fun, I think social fun or something. It's just really, her model gets really complex as well, but to really look at it. So my answer would be that something is different people, and what is fun for one person may not be fun for another. And so again, in one of my other presentations, I talk about my sister loved the game of life because that was the one that was chosen today, and I hated the game of life. And so I use this to demonstrate self-hugging, the concept of self-hugging. We tend to create learning experiences that we enjoy, not what they enjoy. And so the game of life is very simple. It's all based on a little spinner. And if you remember it, it wouldn't sit inside the room. You'd spin it and go flying across the room. And so the point is that there was no strategy. There's nothing I could do to think through, how am I going to make sure my sister loses? And so the enjoyment of that versus I like the game of Othello because I could look at strategy. I could look at things. I could make sure that she lost every time. And so my point when I present it that way is that what if I'm designing for her? She's going to be at great risk. She's going to feel badly about herself because she's not going to push all the way through. She's going to lose and then reflect badly on herself and so on. But if she's designing for me, I'm going to check out because I'm going to say, this is boring. I can figure it out. I can read the board faster than I can play the board. So I can know all the spots on there and so on. So that's where there's not an easy question of what's quote fun. Now there's game mechanics that appeal to a larger group of people, let's say, but to take it all the way back to what we talk about all the time is creating learner persona, learner personas, if you will, to represent segments of your learning population, and then designing for them. And again, that took up a 300-page book, right? So, but we'll tie it back around as well. So
What is the name of your book?
yeah, hold on, I'm trying to get my computer to work. It is called Deliberate Fun. Trying to advance the slide here. Yeah, Deliberate Fun. And I'm not advancing to it, but so that's my name there. And also my email address. Feel free to reach out to me via email. This is what I do. I nerd out on this stuff, so you're not bothering me by talking about gamification of learning, asking about it. And then also, like I said, if you'd like to hear about the Game Garage on Friday nights, I forgot right before we started, I was going to look up and see what we were doing this week. I think it's a platform that is be really cool space, visual space to hold, say like meetings and so on. And I think that's what's coming up this week. So it's
called,
really,
and
really
it's called Zoom.
No, oh, I'm sorry. No, it's called Zoom. No, this one's the visual. Unlike this, you can only be in groups of people around.
Just kidding.
Yeah, around the space. So it'd be like all breakout rooms essentially, but it's visual. So we'd be sitting around the fire, we'd be at the disco, and so on. So it has many limitations that Zoom does much better at.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Well, no, seriously, to the point is because we're trying to figure out holding a conference in the space. So we're pretty sure that, or a workshop, as I should say, not conference, that we'll be shooting it in Zoom, and then this is where they would go to work. So it's just changing the breakout experience. So and that's honest. I'm not saying that because of Zoom being represented here. Good. Actually, I just got. Okay, but anyway, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. We're getting top of the hour, it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. Jonathan, thank you so very much for being such a wonderful moderator for us today and letting us know what's going on. And I'm looking forward to the next several, sounds like, webinars that we'll be working on together.
They'll get tired of me.
I don't think so. So you write another book, so I did look up your book. It's available on Amazon, and we're going to do a book review on it too. So Jenny is writing a report on that. So
good.
But I want to thank you for being with us today, all of you, and for being part of FGDLA. We want to thank Jonathan and Russ and Zoom for their support today. Thank you, and that concludes the webinar. Good afternoon.
Thanks.